Let's talk now to Helen Fields, who's a criminal barrister and author, about this sentence and what Lucy Letby might expect to happen coming up. Helen, I mean, we don't see many whole-life tariffs, particularly among female prisoners. But when you look at the detail of this case, and I've been reading the background notes on every single murder, every single attempted murder, and you look at some of the detail, how this has impacted families. I mean, this really has been an act of evil, and a whole-life tariff is surely what's deserved.
Absolutely. And whole life tariffs whole life orders, we call them, are now reserved entirely for specific cases. So this isn't something that can be given out in any case, depending on how a judge feels. There have to be 2 or more murders involved. There have to be special circumstances met. In this case, those circumstances were met because there were children, babies involved, and because in addition to that, there was a large element of premeditation and planning. And I'm sorry to use the word, but it's a word we use within the legislation, torture, in fact, of those babies. And so the only sentence this judge was ever going to give, Mr. Justice Goss, was going to be the whole life order. Quite rightly so, not least because this wasn't a guilty plea. Lucy Letby didn't come into court and say, yes, I did these things, I want a psychiatric evaluation, I want to tell you what's been happening to me and what was going through my mind. And so by the time the judge got round to sentencing, there was nothing to be said on Letby's behalf, and her counsel quite rightly did not attempt to mitigate. He accepted that there was nothing to be said. There had been a trial, the jury had come to their verdicts, and there was really no mitigation whatsoever.
I mean, how hard has this been to try? Because, I mean, as everyone deserves a defence in our legal system, Lucy Letby had her defence, and I think one of the main points being made, well, this is all circumstantial evidence. There was no smoking gun. There was no witness to her injecting babies with air. There was no witness to her injecting little neonatals with insulin that would lead to their death. All you had essentially was circumstantial evidence, and apart from that one written note, which appears to be some sort of confession that she suggested she wrote after an investigation happened into the increase of deaths on the ward, there isn't really anything where when anyone can say, yes, we saw her do it. So how hard has that been as a case?
You know, it's very difficult, but we say it's circumstantial evidence, but what we really look at as lawyers is the build-up of evidence. So it's not just lots of different strands, it forms a pattern. And of course, you have the evidence from the senior doctors, all of whom had concerns going back to October 2015. So this wasn't something that we looked at in hindsight entirely, and people started to say, oh, well, there's this and there's this. It's not all circumstantial. There is an absolute weight of evidence that convicted Letby, and not just the kind of chart that we've seen that shows her as the only common link all the way through this, but also she'd taken home medical notes. She had, as you noticed, she'd written what appears to be a sort of confession, but also her very strange behaviour, having to be asked to leave the families alone and so on. But the Crown Prosecution Service does not prosecute murders like this unless they have gone through the most rigorous process of looking at the weight of evidence. I mean, you're talking about police considering the case first, then the prosecution, then the barristers, then there's a 10-month trial. And the very fact that the jury felt able to convict on some counts, the murders and attempts, and actually decided there wasn't enough evidence, they couldn't be certain, so they were sure, that's the legal test on other counts, means that the jury felt that on the counts where they did convict, they were certain. It's not a small test in a Crown court. The judge told the jury they had to take everything into account, look at every count individually, and they had to be absolutely certain. And I have every faith in our juries and our legal system, and it looks to me, given that they found not guilty on certain counts, that they knew what they were doing. And I think that probably these verdicts are true.
Yeah, I mean, no stone left unturned. It was a 10-month trial, featured 70 officers, 32,000 pages of evidence, 2,000 people were spoken to, and 250 identified as witnesses in this case. A very difficult one indeed. But, you know, it's remarkable, isn't it, Helen? When the Judge Justice Goss was giving his sentencing statement to Letby as if she was there, of course, notoriously, she was not present. He pointed out that no one understands the motivation for her attacks. And reading more about some of the things that she did, you know, in many cases of these children, she attacked them on multiple occasions, 3 attempts to kill one little tiny baby. Another one attacked with a tube and found bleeding from the mouth. A doctor said he's never seen a bleed that big in a baby of that size. Another child killed on the 4th attempt, another one having sustained liver damage, impact type trauma that a pathologist said is only seen normally in a traffic collision. And that little baby in that incident was heard screaming the sorts of cries that are just never normally heard. I mean, it does leave everybody without words to try and understand how anybody could do this, especially someone who chose to dedicate their career to caring for little children.
It does, but we've seen this before. We've seen it with Beverly Allitt, and there have been other, what we call, I'm afraid, rather macabre angel of death cases. Sometimes this is Munchausen's by proxy syndrome. I'm afraid we rarely manage to pin it down very precisely, but what we do know on the guilty verdicts is that Lucy Letby must be, at the very least, sociopathic. She cannot feel the same way that most of us out here saying, how can someone do that to anyone, but especially to a tiny baby? And it's impossible to get into the heads of these people, is what I've learned over the years. You can't really understand how their brain works because it's such a different way than from the rest of us think. I mean, and the problem is, because one doesn't get to the truth, to be quite honest with you, when defendants give evidence, if they're guilty, that you are seeing, you know, more smoke and mirrors, more lies upon lies. And I don't think we will ever know or understand really Lucy Letby's motivation or what goes on in her head. But what we do know is that the experience of being inside her head is very different than the experience of being inside our brains.
Indeed, inhumane acts by someone who I think can only be described as inhuman. Helen Fields, criminal barrister and author, thank you very much.